My name is Lindy Christensen-Nader. I'm one of the faculty advisors for the Psych Social Club at Southeast Community College. Our club is for students who are interested in psychology and sociology in terms of their educational experiences, their employment plans, or just their identities as individuals and as members of their communities. Our goal with the Zoom discussion that we're going to have today with with Morgan and Lindsay from Voices of Hope is to learn about what their organization does in the community, but also to learn a little bit more about how their academic backgrounds in psychology and sociology are part of the work that they do. So first I'll let Morgan and Lindsay introduce themselves and say a little bit about what their roles are at Voices of Hope, and then we'll talk more about their organization, their academic backgrounds, and what we as members of the SCC community can do to support their mission.
Thank you so much for having us today, Lindy. My name is Morgan, and I'm the Campus Services Coordinator at Voices of Hope. So I coordinate our campus advocacy and prevention efforts across several different campuses in Lancaster County, including doing programming and advocacy at SCC, but also at Nebraska Wesleyan, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Union College, and Bryan College of Health Sciences.
And I'm Lindsay Turner. I'm the Children's Services Coordinator and Victim Advocate at Voices of Hope. And really what that means is that I work specifically with victims that are involved in juvenile court and child and family services with DHHS. And that's, they really have a lot of different barriers when these systems are involved and how to navigate those specific situations that they come in contact with.
So what are the goals or the objectives? What is the mission of Voices of Hope?
So Voices of Hope's mission is really twofold. First and foremost, we strive to provide empowering services for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, other related forms of abuse. Pretty much anyone who doesn't feel safe, whether it's in their house, on their campus, in their community, who has experienced violence and they have concerns about their safety or the safety and well-being of their children, for their family. And we also want to have conversations about violence prevention as well. So the second part of our mission is how do we provide education, awareness, and prevention programming, and also training opportunities for individuals who might be working with survivors of trauma who have experienced violence in its many forms. So we provide a lot of intervention services. So we have a 24-hour crisis line where survivors and also significant others, family members and friends, can call that hotline to speak confidentially with an advocate. But we also do a 24-hour response to our hospitals, our emergency rooms, to be able to work with survivors. We also have a response to law enforcement when there's an arrest for one of these crimes in our community. We provide support groups and crisis counseling and walk-in services, but also, again, a lot of that community outreach. So our agency goals, I think first and foremost, that empowerment philosophy really guides the work that we do with clients. We really maintain that the individuals we work with are the experts of their own lives, right? As advocates, we can provide support and non-judgmental listening and resources and information that can aid in their safety, but we're going to support them with their path in moving forward, whatever that looks like. Confidentiality is another goal we have with our agency. We know that's kind of the cornerstone to the services that we provide. Oftentimes there's a lot of barriers in different systems, whether it's what Lindsay talked about with CPS or with law enforcement for clients, and we never want the fear of their information getting out to be a barrier for clients. So we provide, with a few rare exceptions, completely confidential services for the clients that we serve. Safety is a goal with our agency, but also community collaboration. We really believe as an agency that there's a lot of people who have to be at the table to keep individuals in our community safe. And that's why Voices of Hope participates on several response teams here in Lincoln and Lancaster County, including our threat advisory team, our sexual assault response team, domestic violence response team. So we can ensure that there are a variety of perspectives. We're meeting all of those needs in terms of safety for our clients.
One thing that was really important that the students in our club wanted to know about was how your experiences in social science brought you to where you are today, or how you use your backgrounds in psychology and sociology in the work that you do, particularly in this month of sexual assault awareness and prevention. How would psychology and sociology factor into the work that you do for Voices of Hope?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's in science degree from Nebraska Wesleyan, and I majored in psychology. And you know, when I went into the program, I really just wanted to help people and learn more about what makes people who they are and how it makes them work. And so I went into the program just really excited and wanting to learn, and I just kind of flowed into graduate school. That I got into the program, the counseling psych program at UNL, and then I realized, you know, I don't really want to be a counselor. This wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And as I got more education and experience, I realized that it's more of this community involvement, and really it's advocacy that I wanted to do. I wanted to have both that individual connection with clients, but also like a macro view and a big picture systems perspective, and able to work in that way as well. And I was very fortunate to be able to work for Voices of Hope, which it does all of those things. And I think every day you use those skills that you've learned in both in psychology and in counseling specific education, just especially with like trauma response and how the brain works. I think it's, you know, Morgan said that we do respond to the hospital. So after an assault, it's really important to use that education to then explain to law enforcement or other professionals, like, hey, she probably isn't going to remember these things the way that you're asking, or her emotional response right now is completely valid, and then this is why. And to be able to explain that from an educational standpoint as well. And then for my specific position, working a lot with children, explaining that child development and where they're at and how trauma affects them as well has been really helpful in educating the systems, and explaining, like, yeah, this is actually really normal, and you should not be holding them to this higher standard just because of what they've been through. I also think that the education perspective has really, it helps you think more critically, I think. So maybe not, you learn more about research and statistics and how to read those things. And so just because it's an article written, you know, and it seems really professional, doesn't mean that it's completely true, and that we need to really think critically and ask the questions, like, how did they come up with this information? What about all these other variables and things like that? And so I think education has been vital in being able to work with our clients, and just those like very basic micro skills of counseling, you know, with empathy and mirroring, and how important nonverbal communication has been so important, that you don't need to have the right things to say to survivors, that it's really about your presence and your openness and willingness to walk through this with them that means the most. And a lot of that also comes with experience, and learning from the amazing advocates at Voices of Hope it's just it's a really great experience.
In terms of my educational background, I got my undergrad in women's and gender studies, and then I got my master's in sociology. And I feel like for us in the sociology field, it's more than just a field of study, right? It is a way of seeing our world. And I feel like once you kind of adopt that sociological lens, that sociological perspective, you don't really lose it, right? It changes the way you see and interpret the world around you. And I think for me, it has interacted with other lenses and perspectives that I've acquired throughout my life. So when I was doing my undergrad, I kind of developed a gender lens or a feminist lens. And then working in advocacy, I have this advocate lens. And I feel like they all complement each other really well and interact in a way that allows me to interpret the world around me in a really kind of nuanced way. Mm-hmm. But I was really gravitated towards sociology because of my really strong commitment to social change, right? So I became really intrigued by this idea of public sociology. Mm-hmm. How do we find the problems that exist within our society? But then what is that next step of going out and solving those problems? What does that look like? And so that's what really motivated me to think about some of these public and political concerns and the way that it interacts with public policy and political activism and social change movements. So for me, even though I debated continuing on in the program, it was that grassroots social change that got me really, really excited, that made me want to go out and do the work. I also think sociology is important because it doesn't look at society kind of in this siloed view, right? Sociology allowed me to understand the way that gender-based violence intersects with other oppressions within our society, which has really helped me as an advocate understand what those additional barriers look like. Because I believe when we can take that intersectional approach, we can understand what are some of those barriers for survivors in coming forward and getting the services and the safety that they need. So for example, how does social economic status interfere with someone's ability to be able to get help, especially when we're talking about domestic violence and things like economic control and the lack of being able to be financially free and stable from somebody's abuser, but it's also understanding how somebody's maybe undocumented status or a language barrier. Maybe somebody doesn't speak English as their first language. What sort of barriers are in place, and how do we address all of those types of oppressions and isms to be able to meet the needs of our most marginalized community members. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one thing that really was important to me when I was studying sociology. But the other fundamentally important aspect of sociology is that society and all that happens within it is a social product, right? Like we create society, we create its structures, its institutions, its norms, its way of life, its problems. And if it's a social product, that means we could potentially change these things and prevent these things. So in my role as somebody who does a lot of prevention work, this is the aspect of sociology that really motivates me to continue doing this work, because it gives me a lot of hope, right? If we can teach those skills, we can ultimately make it not only a dent in this problem, but hopefully eliminate it altogether. Anytime I talk with people about the job that I do, I always tell them that I hope that I work myself out of a job someday. I think Lindsay and I can both agree that we don't want to do this forever. We hope that we can live in a world where everyone feels safe and respected in their relationships. So I spend a great deal of time in my work talking with young people and older people about what consent looks like. How do you know when you have consent from your partner? What does truly healthy relationships look like? How do you establish boundaries with somebody you're in a relationship? Why is it important that those boundaries have to be respected? How do we teach things like bystander intervention? How can we teach others to be aware of their surroundings to hopefully interrupt and prevent future acts of violence? So for me, sociology is about finding those problems, knowing that we can change them, and teaching those skills to people to be able to do it.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought up the various aspects that make social science a unique discipline. The pieces about the soft skills and like empathy and the critical analysis things about where does information come from and how do we assess it, but then also that piece about the social construction of these institutions and these issues. I think those are all really powerful ways for us to think about how social science can be really applicable in ways that maybe students and other people haven't thought about. So it was really gratifying to hear, again, how that psychology background, that sociology background really play into the work that you do. The reason that we're having this as a Zoom conversation as opposed to in person is because we're currently experiencing a public health crisis in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. How have your services at Voices of Hope adapted to this? We've had a lot of changes at SCC as an institution, an organization like yours, which thrives a lot on interaction and in-person work. How have you managed this transition?
It's been really hard. It's been challenging because we know that there are a lot of survivors right now that are, honestly, they're trapped in with their abuser, and the isolation is incredible right now, and it's been especially challenging during the pandemic. But adaptation and flexibility is exactly what Voices of Hope does, and I feel like we've really been able to be flexible and work honestly whatever situation comes up. And so we are still available by our 24-hour crisis line. We've actually kind of doubled up staff on that to account for the extra calls that we've been getting, to make sure that we're available all of the time. And so we're still responding to the hospitals, but it's by phone. We are still taking our LPD calls and following up with victims just as we would have normally. We do have our groups that are available on Zoom. Our DV101 class is recorded on Zoom. All of these different services, we've really kept, like Morgan said, confidentiality and safety number one. And so it's been challenging to kind of figure out, I realize that there are new barriers to being able to be in a support group on Zoom when your batterer might come in at any time, right? And how unsafe that is. It's unsafe that, my name is on the screen here, and how are we going to account for that amongst other group members and what that looks like. We're continuing to do our systems responses. It's just all by Zoom. And so the different community teams that we're on, they're still meeting. We're still participating as we would. I still have a lot of meetings with CPS. We're doing a lot of our individual work, either by Zoom if it's safe or phone. I'm doing a lot of emailing now. And I think that has a lot to do with timing. I think sometimes it's safer for survivors to do it maybe at night, after the family's gone to bed, and then they can kind of type out what's been going on. So we have been creative and flexible to be able to help our clients, and honestly, it's kind of, our staff is really amazing, and we communicate a lot by email and, hey, I got this call, what do you guys think we can do? And we all kind of come together to figure out how can we get these needs met, and work flexibly in that way.
So
I just wanted to add that I think although our number of calls and client contact has remained, I think, fairly consistent, I don't know if Lindsay would agree with that, we haven't seen a huge spike yet. Which some individuals might have been reading some of the national headlines about some of these crisis centers in really large cities that maybe have reached that peak in the pandemic, seeing an astronomical amount of callers and victims coming forward. I think Voices of Hope is right on that verge of that because we haven't really hit our peak in Nebraska yet. So like Lindsay was saying, we still have so many individuals that are quarantined with their abuser. It is not safe. We also know, based on national data and other natural disasters and other types of situations, that domestic violence and sexual assault go up when we see these national pandemics. So, you know, Lindsay and I and the rest of our colleagues are kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop because we haven't seen a huge spike yet. I was just on our Zoom call with the sexual assault response team, where I am a representative on that team. And it was interesting to hear from law enforcement and from medical personnel that in March, this last month, their numbers for sexual assault and domestic violence had dropped, which in a way makes sense. It might not be safe for them to reach out to the police when their abuser is in the next room, right? Or they might be hesitant to call if their household has dropped to one income, right? And they are financially dependent on that person, or the reluctancy to go in and seek medical treatment when we know that there could be an escalated risk of contracting COVID-19, right? So there are all of these things that are creating, I think, some limitations in terms of people getting help. And I think as we start to move forward as a state and maybe hopefully get a handle on this pandemic and start to increase or start to kind of scale back some of that social distancing, we're going to see a huge peak in our numbers from individuals. But we've also been seeing more friends and family calling our crisis line. So I just took a call from a friend who, the survivor who's in a domestic violence relationship, couldn't make the call to us personally because her abuser was in the same room, but she could safely communicate with her friend. And so this friend and I spent a great deal of time coming up with a very nuanced safety plan that the friend could then communicate to the survivor, right? So we're using a lot of those third parties to be able to relay really important safety information to survivors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine the sheltering in place, the isolation, the fear about going to institutions like health clinics or seeking institutional assistance. That's going to be a barrier at this time. So yeah, it has been striking to see at the national level how the rates look, and then getting that state level context is really helpful. What can members of the SCC community, what can people in Lincoln do to support Voices of Hope?
Well, April was, it's been a challenging month, as Lindsay said, in that we've kind of described. April is actually Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I have on my teal ribbon here, which I wear every April to be able to start conversations about sexual violence prevention. But we had our biggest three fundraisers in April. And as we're closing out the month, we've tried to make some accommodations to be able to raise some funds because our services have not stopped. And we don't charge for our services. They are all free. We never want cost to be a barrier for somebody who needs help, who needs access to safety and advocacy. And so I know that for a lot of individuals, finances are so tight right now. It's a really challenging time as a country, as a world. We're trying to find our way through this. But I would ask folks that if they have the ability to do so, Voices of Hope would really appreciate a donation during this challenging time so we can continue to staff our 24-hour crisis line, our advocacy line with the hospital and with law enforcement, so we can continue to get life-saving services to people in our community. And the best way to give a donation is to go to our website, which is voicesofhopelincoln.org. There's a donate button, and folks can do that online. And if that's challenging for folks, which we realize that that's not a privilege that everyone has at this moment, finding other ways to support our cause. So once we start to lift some of the social distancing measures, is there a way that you could host like a donation drive for us or a basic hygiene item drive? We're still giving out really important materials for clients, things like diapers, things like personal hygiene items, gas cards that could get somebody out of town to safety. So if there are opportunities as folks kind of start to go back out in the community, could you organize a drive at your work or at your school? I think SCC has done a drive for us before with the barrels for basics. Can you raise some basic hygiene items so we can continue to provide those items for clients?
I think too, as SCC students, I think it's really important to, speak up and ask questions, listen openly, and kind of embrace all of the different areas of our mission statement, honestly, and believe survivors when they're disclosing. And when you hear comments that just didn't sit right with you, call it out, speak up. And I think it's really important to try to change that culture of violence. And I think SCC it's a big entity. There's a lot of it's a variation of ages too, and I think it's a great opportunity to be able to really change that culture. I especially think engaging men is going to be vital to changing that culture. And I think it just takes one person to say, yeah, that joke really wasn't funny, and that supports our work so much, because then we're not the only ones that are saying all of these things. It's the community as well.
Yeah, and I think even just going to our social media pages, if you go like Voices of Hope on Facebook, on Instagram, we share, well, not only updates about our resources, how to get a hold of us safely and confidentially, but we're also sharing really important articles and information about how to support survivors, how to interrupt and dismantle rape culture, ways to support survivors, not only in April, but throughout the year. And never underestimate the power that you have in terms of sharing this information, right? You never know who might need to see our crisis line or read that article that is affirming and validating to their experiences. It really identifies you as a safe person, somebody who understands these issues, understands the resources, understands how to make a referral. So, from time to time, make that visible on your feed, because I guarantee there is somebody who really needs to see that.
And you did give us your website. Could you really quickly give the 24-hour crisis line just so that it's a part of this recording?
Yes, our 24-hour crisis line is 402-475-7273. And this hotline runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Someone can call this hotline literally at 2 a.m, and a confidential advocate is going to pick up that phone. And it's really important to know that we don't ask for names on this hotline. We don't ask for identifying information. This is an appropriate venue to process through something, to safety plan. This is appropriate for friends and family to call if they're worried about a loved one and they want to know how to support them. So please don't hesitate in calling this line. That's why we're here. We've doubled up to be able to answer all of these calls, and we want folks to know that we're here for them and they are not alone during this really uncertain time.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank Morgan and Lindsay from Voices of Hope so much for speaking with us today about not only the role of social science and the work that they do, but also just broadly about the importance of the community recognizing issues and taking responses to try to address it. Again, their website is voicesofhopelincoln.org. Please do follow them on social media, as Morgan recommended. Challenge rape culture and other cultures of violence, as Lindsay recommended. If you have any questions about the Psych Soc Club, you can always reach out to me, Lindy Christensen-Nader, or to the other faculty advisor, Nicole Trevino-Flores, and we're happy to answer any questions about psychology and sociology for you. Again, thank you so much, Morgan and Lindsay. Any last remarks? Or
I just appreciate you inviting us to talk. I think it's really important to get our message out, and I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much for this conversation.
Okay, all right, well, thank you so much, those of you who watched this Zoom meeting. Again, please do support Voices of Hope, follow them, give them whatever ability you're able to support their mission. Thank you.